Is it possible to have a European Union in bits and pieces? I don't care what kind of personal decision you take. The only thing I care for is that you take an informed decision, whatever your decision be.
Timo Klein, you're a student here at the London School of Economics, doing your PhD in not too far from now. You come from the Netherlands.
That's correct.
And both in the UK and in the Netherlands, there is a certain Euroscepticism which seems to be on the rise. When you compare the phenomenon in the UK and in the Netherlands, do you see rather parallels or differences?
Well, I think that there are a lot of similarities between Euroscepticism in my country, Netherlands, as well as in the UK, as in other countries as well, in France or Austria, etc. And I think that's mainly rooted in the fact that politicians seem to be unable to convince the electorate of the importance of European integration, of completing European integration, or improving it rather. And therefore, I think that this the possible referendum that's coming up in the UK is an important trigger for this debate. Mm-hmm. And I think that politicians should seize this opportunity or to take leadership in trying to convince the electorate of the importance of Europe, rather than just making decisions for them without their consent. Mm-hmm. I think in its most basic form, it's I think that the Eurosceptic movement in the Netherlands, Geert Wilders with the Freedom Party, is a very important aspect of politics, because they force the establishment to take accountability for their actions vis-à-vis Europe, and to convince the electorate of their importance. Where the risk lies is that politicians don't take leadership, but start to follow the electorate. And that's what I think you also see in Britain at the moment with the Conservatives, that rather than trying to take leadership and convince the electorate of the importance of the UK, they're following the rise of Euroscepticism to try to convince voters from UKIP to go to the Conservatives. So there's the risks involved.
I don't know if you would agree that there is some British peculiarity that is maybe making the debate here a bit different from, say, in Belgium.
Yes, well, there is a historical path of Euroscepticism in the UK from the beginning when they became a member. Mm-hmm. There's always been some reluctance to great deeper integration, and the economic interests were always more important than the political will to integrate. But in that respect, I also think that the economic interests as they are now are much too important for the Brexit to be a viable option. The costs of withdrawing from the single market, I think, are simply too big to be possible.
Well, I definitely would agree that it does seem that there's a sort of division appearing within the EU as an outsider, sure, as an American, between the countries members of the Eurozone, which certainly are proceeding with more political integration and economic integration, as opposed to those remaining outside, including the UK.
The UK has substantial interest in the common market. In practical terms, withdrawing from the EU would be a very substantial step.
I think the dynamic is certainly very interesting at the moment in UK politics. I'm quite certain that if the UK were ever to leave the EU, it would very much want to be a part of the single market, and probably adopt an EFTA stance, for example, of Norway, or even Iceland. But I think obviously that would be to the detriment of the UK, because it would no longer have the influence of being able to negotiate from inside the EU. You just have to accept EU laws that was decided by the other member states. But no, I don't see there's any way that the UK could, in any economic terms, be able to completely leave the common market and return to the outside. I just don't think that would be possible.
Having Britain inside the European Union clearly is a huge advantage. It's, Britain just loses an enormous amount of influence with a series of countries who clearly want Britain to stay inside the European Union. Personally, I think the United Kingdom will remain the United Kingdom, and secondly, I think the United Kingdom will remain inside the European Union. The reasons I think that the UK will remain inside the European Union, is there's too much to lose if Britain loses, comes out of the EU. The consequences of coming out of the EU constitutionally, legally, economically, and in terms of influence are pretty formidable. But then you still have to ask the question that if it's in the British national interest, the UK national interest to remain inside the EU, why then are we having this vote? Which is the big problem. And as in most things to do with foreign policy, and a lot to do with the European Union in this country, particularly in the UK possibly, it has a lot to do with domestic politics. And it has particularly to do with the domestic politics inside the Conservative Party. Is the UK economy currently is doing quite well. It's growing, not by much, but it's growing. It's not stagnating, jobs are being created, even manufacturing is going up. City of London looks like it's doing well. House prices in London are rising. There's a feel-good attitude at the moment in many parts, not all, but many parts of the United Kingdom. Then the British look across the Channel. They look at not necessarily at Germany or Luxembourg or Holland or Scandinavia, but they look at France, they look at Spain, they look at Portugal, Italy, Greece, obviously. And so, well, the Eurozone is not doing very well, is it? So this reinforces the Euroscepticism. We could go better by ourselves. I think that's a false argument. The other thing I think we should also take into account, there's quite a lot of Euroscepticism in continental Europe as well. It's not just the British who are out there all by themselves being horrible to Europe. There are many continental Europeans who have strong doubts about the European project. It's producing stagnation, it's producing unemployment, it's creating resentment. Look how strong the Front National is in France. Look at what's happening in the Netherlands. You know, there is a general skepticism amongst increasing numbers of Europeans who are worrying that, you know, are we going to have another 2 years of stagnation, 3 years, 4 years, if we remain inside the Euro or indeed inside the European Union. And again, so although it's about domestic conservative politics, it's about wider issues to do with the European project, how successful it has not been economically for many people over the last 3 or 4 years. And also the UKIP also gets a lot of support politically and ideologically, if you like, from other Eurosceptical parties in continental Europe. So this is not just a British problem, it seems to me, this is a more continental-wide problem as well.
In my view, we'd all lose from not working together and actually have a lot to gain from working together. Just think of the ongoing negotiations with on a free trade agreement with the United States or with Asia. We can really serve our interests and our values much better if we stand together than if the Asians, notably the Chinese, can pick each one of us Europeans off and force their conditions on us. The idea of being able to have certain access to markets without common standards is, to my opinion, an illusion. No one wins from disengagement. Actually, everyone loses. The United Kingdom would lose, and Europe as a whole would lose. We are very good together, and we like, as a good family, to disagree. And that's actually a very productive thing. We should continue that.